Hello and welcome to the Startups of London podcast. I'm your host Ozzy, and today we are talking about a very, very interesting topic that is that I'm personally curious about. And I think if you are especially interested in FinTech, you'll find a lot of value in this conversation as well. So our fundamental belief is that entrepreneurs learn and draw courage from each other. That's why I'm super excited for our special guest today, Sara Brodersen, founder of Canaree Finance. So Canaree makes it easy to create an accurate financial model for your business in minutes, allowing to clearly see your runway. It's a much needed tool to quickly see if you're on the right path to becoming cash flow positive or running out of cash. Hello there, Sara.
Hi, Ozzy. How are you?
All good, all good. It's a beautiful day to talk about finance and London.
Yeah.
To be honest, I cannot wait for things to go back to a semblance of normality. So the resume our conversations with founders. I find it so invigorating to have these conversations face to face. So it's been a difficult period, yeah. So
I can imagine.
My first question to you, let's jump right on it. Do you think it is possible to make it as a fintech startup in London without having any external funding?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's up to the team behind and the founders to decide, are we, the type of business that will take on venture capital, sort of become this rocket ship? Or are we more a type of business that will, be an SME and we will grow organically? And really, I think it comes down to maybe the temperament of the founders and what type of company they want to build, right? Because growth and lots of money and, capital and big teams can be really exciting, but it's also very stressful and it requires a lot of, you have to adapt constantly, and it's competitive and ruthless in many ways. So I think it's, if you're the type of person that maybe prefers to have a smaller team and build a really good, solid business, it's definitely possible as well. But again, it depends on the niche that you're in. Obviously, if there are bigger players with lots of venture capital behind them, it is difficult to compete. And I think that's why most fintechs will go the sort of venture capital route and go for that sort of rocket ship of growing exponentially.
It's definitely a good resource when you want to build a team of superstars quickly and perhaps pour some money on the growth channels, your funnels, etc. But there's always this tension I find of focusing on growth versus profitability when it comes to launching a startup with or without funding. What do you think about that? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, it's what you say. I mean, I definitely think you have the opportunity to be more competitive if you take on that type of funding. But as I said, it's so Canaree is actually my second business, and when I raised funding for my first business, I always said I never want to build a business again that has to deal with investors, because as a founder in that type of business, as Canaree is as well, I spend most of my time pitching to investors, updating investors, talking to potential investors, and it takes some focus. And one of the downsides of it is that especially younger founders who are first-time founders tend to gravitate towards building a business for the investors and not for their customers, because they're constantly thinking about the next round and increasing valuation. But the fact is, if you build something for your customers, investors will come, right? So I think there are definitely certain aspects you need to think about. But I mean, growth typically comes with venture capital, but then you can also, fall pretty far if you don't succeed.
A terminology that I'm very fond of nowadays is customer-funded business. So all of the startups are funded in a way, but some are funded by their customers. And because your main goal is achieving product market fit. There is that incredible match overlap of goals there, because once you have it, then you can also grow the business and you don't have to spend any time dealing with investors. But on the other hand, getting investment can be an incredible thrill in itself. It sometimes even signals that the business is growing very well. So with that in mind, what, in your experience, what do investors look for, ask when fundraising?
I mean, you could do a whole PhD on that topic. I think, first of all, it depends on what type of investor you're talking to. So, typically a very linear funding journey would be that, you raise a little bit from, I think they call it friends, family, and fools in the beginning. And then
I hadn't heard of the last step.
Anyone who would put in money at a very early stage when you haven't proven anything. And obviously, what they ask is probably just that they, they will give you the money based on the love for you. But then you would typically move into, more the raider angel types, where, it's very much based on the team. So definitely knowing, what type of founders are there? Have they, have you hired other people in the team? Understanding the product. If you have a product already, any traction. But it depends a little bit on where you are with your business and what you're building, of course. Any metrics would be relevant. I think the biggest difference, because after angels, you'll probably move on to more of the funds and the VC funds. And the biggest difference between VC funds and angels is that angels can be a bit more sort of conservative. So things they will ask is probably more, when are you breaking even, right? Where venture capitalists will be, when can we IPO or when can you exit? So it's not necessarily focused on profitability from venture funds, but it's rather, your growth and your unit economics, things like that. So do your research in terms of your meetings beforehand on what type of investor you'll be speaking to.
Do you think there's any form of bias when it comes to, investors are people as well. They make decisions, and we all have biases naturally. So they do have some biases. But to be more precise with the question, do you think they're able to overcome their biases when making investment decisions, especially when it comes to women founders, people from BAME backgrounds, minorities, who are not native English speakers? So in your observation, are they able to manage that bias and be fair, or is it worse than that?
Well, obviously there's what I experience, and then you can look numbers, and obviously the numbers speak for themselves, that women founders and minority groups just get a lot less funding. It's less than, for all of those groups, I think, that are funded and founded by, for example, an all-female founding team. And in a lot of research on this topic around why does this happen? Do minority groups and women, do they have the same type of access to the network that you need to raise funding, right? Because you have to remember that to do a fundraise, you'll typically have to speak to a lot of investors, and they only invest in maybe 1% of the entrepreneurs they speak to. Yeah. So how do I get to speak to 100 investors if I don't have that network from the outset? And then if I do get on the call, will they judge me harshly because I'm a woman, or I'm Black, or I don't speak perfect English, and so on? And I think, there was a Swedish study that came out a couple of years ago, I think, where they had looked into how do investors ask questions to this was specifically on gender, right? So how do they ask questions to male entrepreneurs and to female? Yeah, it's very interesting. And I don't have it memorized, but at least the study found that the type of questions that investors ask then is more sort of promoting, right? So is how big do you think your company could be? Whereas to women, it would be more sort of preventive in a way. So not really letting the female entrepreneur be able to express how big it could be, but rather focusing on the problem areas. So how are you going to handle this X problem in your business? And so obviously that just means that the conversation is biased in itself.
It is very striking indeed, and it's quite unfortunate. But I always say there's a terminology that we can borrow from psychology, which is locus of control. Some things are in your control, some are not. Yes. And in this case, yes, access to investors is a big part of that calculation. But the other aspect is how ready you are for the investor. Now, the hill might be more steeper for you. You cannot change the inclination of the hill, but you can prepare for that climb in a better way. And I think that ties us to how Canaree helps businesses. So you have this connection, right? Because it's a financial business model. I would like to hear more about the business and who your ideal client is and how you're helping founders out there.
Yeah, so essentially what we built is a platform where you can build your financial model or any sort of forecasting that you might need to run your business. Compared to what you would do in Excel, our platform is completely no code. So you don't have to use formulas. It's simply inputting your numbers to project your finances. So, we were talking about fundraising before. Typically, you would need a financial model to forecast the next couple of years in your business to be able to raise that fundraise or to raise that funding. And so that's a very likely scenario that you'll see one of our customers going to model out, how much do we need to raise? What will the team look like for the raise, and so on and so forth. So in that scenario, it's sort of early stage companies, probably up to sort of Series A. But we also have customers that are growing organically, and they might want to apply for grant or apply for EIS, SEIS, this tax benefit that is really helpful to many businesses. So it can be, a multitude of use cases, really. And we cater to any location. So I think we have companies from 38 countries on board already, obviously mainly centered in the UK, but given we have a very international team, it's attracted companies from all over.
That's fantastic. So if you were to dig into what's the ideal client, as you mentioned, it is until Series A, but can you give me some more details there? What would be a problem they are solving? How would they discover you, and like what would be the competitive advantage there?
Yes, a lot of questions there, but typically it's scalable businesses, so technology driven, which is why we see this fundraising sort of scenario come up quite often. We do have companies past series, but it depends on how advanced your model is to be. Obviously, we're developing the product all along, so we're doing a big rollout next week, which will definitely be able to cater to much later stage companies as well. But yeah, I think it is companies that are scalable, and typically we see them come on board when they're doing the fundraise, when they're starting to think about the raise, or when they have already done a model, typically in Excel, and they've got really bad feedback from an investor, and then they come to us and say, actually, we probably need more help on the financial modeling. So what we can offer on top of sort of the tool is that we actually have advisors that people can book. So they can get on a call with us, and we can guide them on, how do you think about your model? What's important for the type of business that you run? Yeah. But we also have, so the competitive edge compared to Excel is that we have an intelligence layer in the product. So it means as you build out your model and put in your numbers, we will actually analyze them based on what type of company are you, what stage are you at, And then we will sort of say, well, here's a red flag. Maybe go back and check this number because it looks a bit off, or, the benchmark is a lot higher. So here's 3 ways you can improve that. And so it becomes this little sort of pocket advisor in a way.
That's fantastic. I mean, you haven't mentioned this, but looking at your website and having done some research on Canaree, I think one of the strongest assets there is how beautiful everything looks when in your reports. And I think that this is usually underappreciated, but because we are very visual beings, the correct and detailed and well-designed display of information is actually very, very important. It's crucial, especially when you need to convince people. It just shows that level of professionalism. And if we were to compare, yes, perhaps they could do, if they're really good with Excel, get the same result in an analytical and numeric way. But then they would also need to work with a designer specific for them to be able to display everything as clearly and openly and in a beautiful way as you're doing. So I think that's a strength. If I was thinking of being a customer for Canaree, that would be the selling points. One of the selling points.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, I think it's definitely down to Nashish, our brilliant designer. He's in charge of both the website and the product, and obviously our developer is implementing his designs. But I think it's
he's done a good job.
Exactly. I'll pass it on. But I think it's, your point is really important, especially for, founders who might not come from a finance background, where tend to be more visual perhaps, right? So it's like, I could do this in Excel, but I just want to pull my hair out. And here, when I enter things into Canaree, it just sort of aligns and there's graphs I can look at instead of thousands of numbers, and that helps me more. And the biggest selling point, or sort of the biggest compliment we get, is when our customers say, I actually feel more confident in my numbers. So going into the investor meeting, say, and presenting my numbers is just so much more comfortable for me now. That is the dream scenario for us, right? That we can give that confidence. Yeah.
It's incredible. I have an example to share. It's totally unrelated, but it's in fact quite close. It's related in a very indirect way, let me say. So last night I was watching Robert Sapolsky's Stanford lectures on human behavior, and there are very interesting bits there. And he talks about this categorical thinking in humans. So of course the visual spectrum starts from red, goes all the way to violet, and each different culture, each different language group puts different barriers between where red starts and where orange starts versus where green starts is actually different in the Swedish culture, in the Turkish culture, in the American culture, in the Japanese culture, and so on. So that I think that was fascinating. And when he talks about that, he also mentions, so if, for example, the red you think in your native language is the exact red that you see on the graph, then you recall more of that information. So you remember that red in a quicker way. And I think this ties to what you're doing here. So if the data is visualized beautifully in a very clear and easy to understand way, the investor or the person you are trying to convince will remember more of your company data in a human behavioral, neurological, psychological way. So there's a lot of things going on when we are able to be really good with data visualization. I think it's an incredible topic. But anyways, my last question to you is, it's interesting, isn't it? So this new situation, and I'm personally curious about this as well. Okay, Brexit, it's a whole mess. I won't get into that. Of course, it's not our topic. COVID, it's a different type of a beast. I won't get into that because it's another topic and people have been speaking about this enough, I think. But I would like to have your thoughts on what you think is the new normal in your vision will be specifically for the entrepreneurs and startups of London. How do you envision our life in, let's say, after the end of this summer. Do you think things will go back to a normal? What type of a normal do you think it's going to be? Do you think we'll be mingling with each other in co-working spaces? What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, from the outset, startups have an incredible opportunity. And I say that because, yes, this year has been tough, both because of Brexit and COVID, especially on startups, because they, in many ways, have sort of been left out in the cold and trying to fend for themselves. But the fact that if you can get through a crisis like this, you have the best foundation to build a very resilient business. And also we see, startups are much more adept at changing and iterating. So when suddenly the government says, okay, you will have to work from home, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like for us, for example, we just took our laptops and went home. And yes, it's been challenging, and obviously people with kids or living alone. And so I'm not trying to diminish the challenge, but I'm saying in terms of our business processes, it wasn't a major disruption as such. We were used to working from home some days. And so I think if startups can really hone in on that ability to change and adapt to whatever happens, that will mean that they're much more competitive against, for example, any incumbents that's in the same industry. So I think that part is really exciting. And I think startups should focus on that a lot more. And then, yes, obviously a new normal, I'm just talking from our team's experience, is that, hey, we don't actually want to go back to having to commute 2 hours every day or, spending hours and hours away from our families if we could have more of a hybrid situation. So we're definitely looking at some kind of hybrid work environment where, if you want to work from home, that's fine. Or, if you want to come into an office, that's also fine for those days where you really need face-to-face interaction. And I think obviously that will then impact, as you say, co-working spaces needs to be a lot more flexible, because I'm definitely not paying for a full-time office, right? Because that doesn't make any sense. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think, not just startups and the founders, but also the employees are reassessing, hey, life can be different. It doesn't have to be this maniac way of working 80 hours a week. It can be more hybrid and flexible. And that is especially interesting, for starting a family or for just taking care of yourself and your health a lot more.
I agree. There are a lot of silver linings when it comes to the situation. Some people do not get the chance in a whole lifetime to sit and reflect on their situation, on some of their habits, which might be otherwise destructive. And I think this period gave us the chance to be more deliberate about our well-being and really reconsider some of the assumptions we have. I think the needs in the market have changed when it comes to user behavior, especially from the perspective of co-working spaces, accelerators, incubators, and there are a lot of startups who work with other startups. So there's a lot of things changing there. But I think the more important thing, and I agree with you there, is we've started to question why we need a specific thing. And we are more deliberate about the choices we make. So perhaps that's something good after all, when we take a look back at these days, 2021, 2022, in 5 or 10 years. And perhaps we'll not see it in a very, very negative light. That's my hope anyways.
Yes. Yeah, me too. And for a startup, for me, it's a huge opportunity also to attract talent that might have gone to incumbents where they could earn more money, but suddenly if flexibility is or working from home, if that's more important, that's a great asset to have as a startup that won't potentially do anything, right? That you could, be competitive even against larger companies who might not be as flexible in terms of working patterns.
Sara, thank you very much for joining this episode of the Startups of London podcast.
Thank you so much, Ozzy.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.